Okay, so thank you for coming today and talking to our students about the project that we're doing. What brought you to that idea? What made you care about that?
Right, so I remember we were all choosing the projects. At first we got to do a Google form, and in that Google form we just would talk about what we wanted to do the most. And I was thinking, okay, if this is a project that I'm going to take seriously, I want it to be a project that I'm passionate about, that I can relate to, so I can have full focus on it. So I was going through some ideas, and then I through family and friends that were either wrongfully imprisoned or currently in prison. I thought of current standards and how it's separated, not only my family's family, but my friends' families. So I was very passionate about imprisonment and how to deal with those who are imprisoned after their future, because it's very hard for someone when they get out of prison to accumulate back into society, because often if there's strikes on their records, it's hard to get a job and everything. So I was very passionate about this subject, so that's why I decided, okay, I really want to focus on imprisonment. And then you have to narrow it down, because you can't just say, oh, I'm going to do all of imprisonment. You have to, because with imprisonment, for example, you can focus on maybe before they're imprisoned and maybe wrongful imprisonment, or you can focus...
Yeah, I also noticed on your original proposal, I think, I thought it was great that when you all first started talking about it, your goals, some of your ideas were just improving conditions so that things would be better there, that people would have necessities, getting funds for better necessities, getting rid of things like solitary confinement. But then ultimately it was you who said, maybe we should focus on getting less people in prison, or getting more of the people who are in prison out of prison, so that they can do more with the funding that they have.
Exactly. So part of that was how currently prison is, and there's a lot of problems in prison, perhaps how guard treatment or AIDS spreading. And then I had read that a lot of reasons for this problem was overcrowding. If you're trying to pinpoint the source, that was the source. And so I was thinking, okay, well, maybe we should find a way to prevent this overcrowding, to prevent all these issues from occurring in the first place. And so that is when we did some research. I believe it was Julio who came upon the Second Chance Act, which is basically an act, for those that don't know, it's basically an act that was proposed for integration back into society and to prevent going back into prison for those that were in prison. And so that's when we decided, hey, let's focus on this act, and we should really give attention to this, because at that point, that's when the Second Chance Reauthorization Act was in play.
So it had existed, but it was only for a certain number of years.
Yeah,
and it expired.
Yeah, it was in 2008, I believe, that George Bush had, under his presidency,
signed it.
Yeah, that it was signed, and then it kind of just died down. But I believe that when I was looking at the numbers back in my project, it was predicted that because of the passing of that bill, it prevented 61,000 in their numbers, people from going back into prison. So it had really helped integrate them back into society and not go back.
And prison isn't supposed to just be a place to punish people.
Right.
It's not, this isn't ancient civilizations. It's not Hammurabi's code. So if it's supposed to be about rehabilitation, then I think that it was wise to focus on ways that we could actually rehabilitate prisoners. So ultimately you all decided that you wanted to focus on that act, and I think that the discussion came up to write a petition. What did you end up doing with that?
So we were talking about writing a petition, but then due to SMART goals, we were thinking, is this feasible? Do we have enough time? Are we able to do this on our own? And then we had come across a petition that actually summarized all the ideas that we wanted for the Second Chance Act. It basically gave a little explanation of the Reauthorization Act, and was saying, hey, we should support this so we could push it through government, let's rally this up. And my group and I, we were oh, well, this is a great way to send more attention to this, because it had already had about 100 signatures, and we felt that if we could expand the petition, if we can make more get more signatures for it, that it would get attention as you rally and get more numbers.
I think that's really important that you mentioned that, because I think a lot of times when people think about changing a law, they think that they have to do it by themselves. Yeah. When the reality of it is that, this is a country where there are millions of people who are concerned with civil rights and activism and who want to do things to make a difference. And so finding things that already exist and just jumping on them and helping them build momentum is just smart activism. You don't have to rebuild the wheel. I don't remember how much, and I think it was hard for you all to calculate how many of the signatures were as a result of you, although you could look through some of it. Yeah. By the time that they closed the petition, it had 13,705 supporters, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
A petition, though, I think sometimes one of the things that gets confused is people think, well, I'm going to petition, and we'll ask, who are you going to petition? They'll say, everyone in the world. That's not how petitions work.
Right.
Petition is a specific request. So, who was this specific request geared towards?
So, the specific audience of which this petition was going to was like the senator.
Because it was a U.S. Senate bill.
Exactly, it was a U.S. Senate bill, so it was toward the senators to get their attention. Like, hey, this is what the people want. This is the bill that we want them to do. And so, more specifically, though, one who's on this bill a lot is Dianne Feinstein, and so we had decided, like, hey, maybe on top of, like, getting support for this petition, we should actually reach out to the senator and try to get their attention, you know. I wrote the most perfect email I could possibly write, and I went over it, and I just, like, I went with my group and we're like, does this summarize what we want to envision, what we want to capture? Is this, like, summary, basically, of the petition? And we agreed, like, hey, this is actually really good. So we had sent it to, Dianne Feinstein, and she ended up replying to it like 2 or 3 days later, and it was a crazy moment because I don't know if people realize, but senators get thousands of emails, and to filter those and like get to be responded to.
Yeah, a lot of times if you write something about immigration, you'll get the stock letter of response. Here are my positions on immigration, but that letter was very clearly, like, she covered every one of your points.
Everything. Yep. She was like, Dear Pam, like, I'm glad we both agree on this issue. I want you to know that I'm working on this to pass this currently through the Senate. And
what other things did your group do to try to get attention and get people to sign your petition and get people to pay attention to this issue?
So we decided, besides, like, going online and reaching out to, like, the virtual world and reaching out to, like, the direct source point of the senator, that we should try it within our own community. So that's when we decided, like, okay, well, let's go to Costco, where, you know, a lot of individuals go to do their daily needs. And it was really intimidating, very intimidating. I personally I'm kind of shy, so it's hard for me to go to a stranger and ask them to take time out of the day, especially because I know how busy people can be. So that was a moment that I really had to step out of my shell and say, okay, like, you're trying to do something for a change, so you have to put your full effort into it, regardless of if you feel intimidated or not. You need to try. And actually, the responses we got, although a lot of people were like, hey, like, I don't have time, there were those, like, genuine people that were like, oh, wow, this is very interesting that I'm like, I would love to do this, I'm on board. And we got about, like, 15 signatures in an hour, which was quite surprising to me, because I hadn't realized that, you know, people, if there are people willing to listen, like, you'll get your no's, but you'll also get those that will, like, jump on board with you, and it was a very enlightening moment for me.
Julio and Karen did is they went to a march, and they put I believe in second chances on their signs, and I thought it was really smart of them. They put a tiny URL that linked to the petition on the back of their signs, and they kept noticing people taking pictures of their signs. So it's very possible, even though it's hard to know who signed and who didn't, it's very possible that you did get a lot of signatures from that. So what ended up ultimately happening with this was that there was another group of senators who said, well, we want this bill that reduces minimum sentences, and you want this bill that offers better rehabilitation and jobs and things like that. What if we combine them? And so that summer, a bill got passed through Congress that July called the 21st Century Cures Act. So I feel like you all were very successful.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, like, just finding out about that is crazy, especially because I don't, like, when you do something, you don't realize as a student, you think, I don't have enough power, like, what can I do? But when you when you actually go out there and you jump on other people, what they're doing, supporting it, like, all the resources given for this project, it was a chance to do something with it if you really took advantage of that. And I realized through this project, like, hey, I do actually have a voice, and I can do a lot to get that voice heard.
So if you could give advice to this year's juniors on how to be successful on this project, what are some of the tips that you would give?
First and foremost, like, when starting the project, you have to take it as, like, the real deal. You can't just say, oh, this is another project and swipe it on the side. I know it's easy for a lot of people to do that, and then you focus on the specifics. I know it's really hard with current acts that they can cover, like, a lot of broad details, but you really want to focus specifically, like in the SMART goals, you want to focus specifically on something so that it's easier to say, I want this done and I want it done through these steps, and to get people on board, because often when you have something that's very broad, people, like, it's very hard to promote that to people because they're like, okay, well, it covers all these things, but how? And then, you find yourself in a loophole of explaining.
And it's hard to believe that something is ever going to happen if it's like, well, we're going to do all of this. It's like, yeah, right.
Exactly. So once you find that specific part of, I want to do this, like, for what I'm passionate about, the key is getting, like, there's so many resources that's given to us in this project, and it's, acquiring those resources and taking advantage of them. It's very important to take advantage of those resources, and to not, like, especially what I learned was, like, not to be afraid to come out of your shell or do something you're uncomfortable with, because if it's generally for the good of a community, then it will be worth it in the long run. You realize, like, a lot, like what I said, enlightening moments. Go out to the community. There's such a broad range, like was mentioned, the May Day March, our own community, reaching out to the direct point, which was the senator, and just taking all these different communities and reaching out to those different parts of the community. It's very important that you try to make it as wide span as possible, which is also why we chose a petition, because it was virtual, so people in other states, there was a way for them to join and hop in. So
in this past year and a half, whatever it's been, we have seen just this huge wake-up of activism on all sides, that everyone, both Democrat, Republican, people are realizing, like, okay, I can't just let everybody else handle this. I have to be politically active. So there are more marches and there are more outlets for engaging the community in political issues now than there were then.
Exactly, and you highlighted an important point. Like, we can't just assume, oh, it's going to be dealt with because it's an act and it'll just be pushed through, because it's very hard in politics to push through an act. It's extremely hard, and so it's important, like you said, to not assume, oh, I don't have to do anything. Like, it'll be dealt with on its own. Perhaps, like, majority of people agree with it, so what would my voice, like,
not all bills get voted on. I think that's something not a lot of people realize, is that a senator or a representative can say, oh, I introduced this bill, even though they're doing it just to be able to say on the campaign trail, oh, I introduced a bill about this. But they'll never push it to a vote, and nobody will ever calendar it for a vote, and so then it just dies on the House floor.
Yep, exactly. And that's a majority of bills, I think it was like 3%. 75% of bills actually.
I didn't know the statistics, but that sounds about right.
Yeah, it's crazy, and you're 100% correct. Like, a lot, like, it'll often just either drop or not even be voted on.
So it's impressive when you can get it voted on.
Yeah.
Any last tips or advice for students?
Definitely reach out to your teachers, your peers. I know how important it was, especially when you gave, like, specific feedback of, like, hey, maybe you guys should take this path, and, like, that guidance is very helpful.